The set revival for Remix Rumble is live, and TFT Flow has been updated for the first time for a revival set, which is super exciting for me. Obviously, I'll still be updating for set 14, but set 10 was my favorite set that they ever released. I understand if you disagree with that. So if you're looking for a break from set 14, this is a really solid option. A couple of caveats before we get into this patch guide. The first one to understand is that if you're playing any of the comps I talk about here today, you're probably going to end up noob stomping. You'll see a couple of comps that are below a 3.5, many comps that are below a 4.0, a couple of comps that are below a 4.2. Normally, this would be completely meta warping, but the reason we see so many compositions like this is because a lot of people playing the revival right now are just playing for fun. They don't really understand how to play the game. They don't know any of the meta compositions from the original set 10. They're just playing for fun. It is what it is. So if you play any of the meta builds, you can just bully those people all you want. It kind of is what it is. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that 1 and 2 cost reroll looks completely broken right now, because if you play for 1 and 2 cost reroll, you don't really have to interact with the headliner mechanic nearly as much, because you just pick up your carry and kind of go from there. Whereas if you're looking to play into one of these AD flex boards, for example, you have to transition your headliner. You have to be thinking throughout the course of the game. It's much more likely that you're going to make mistakes. So that's the first thing. The second thing about 1 and 2 cost reroll is that a lot of them are playing around the Superfan shell. And when you play around Superfan, you just get a really strong opener because you have a guaranteed item on a 2-star unit in the early game, which means you're guaranteed to get tempo. And tempo is something a lot of lower level players struggle with. So when you're playing that 1 and 2 cost reroll, it gives you really strong direction. So those are two things I want to note real quickly, is that 1 and 2 cost reroll looks really strong right now, but that's because it's difficult to make mistakes with those compositions. Now, when it comes to the meta here, they buffed vertical KDA just before the final patch for set 10, which is this is what this is getting played on. And as a result of that, vertical KDA is kind of like Street Demon from last patch. It's just that broken. And then we also have Annie reroll that's quite good. We have AD flex, which is not that good if you look at the stats, because again, most people have no idea what they're doing, but is actually really broken if you're able to get to the final board states that define these compositions. If you played set 10, you probably remember this Ezreal Zed board that was kind of taking over AD flex. It's not nearly as good as it was during its heyday, but you can still use this as a transition into one of these other Jazz-based max cap boards. Now, when it comes to artifacts, this is very interesting because most of these artifacts did not exist in the original set 10. So first of all, we have Death's Defiance and Mittens on Riven, which is quite good. We have all these range-based artifacts really good on Yasuo. So this is kind of like Nocturne from set 13 in the sense that if you're able to get Fish Bones, if you're able to get Rapid Fire Cannon, if you're able to get Sniper's Focus, all of these are really strong options on Yasuo, as well as Spectral Cutlass and Prowler's Claw also being quite good on him. So usually Yasuo is not a unit that you're looking to play, but if you're able to get one of these artifacts, he can become quite broken. We have Gold Collector on Samira. This was broken in the original set 10 just because she scales with crits. We have Horizon Focus, which is normally not an artifact that you take for direction, but in this case, it's really broken on Vex in particular because her ability stuns units in a 1 hex radius. We have Innervating Locket for Amumu in the solo frontline with Executioners, which is quite good, but you're probably more interested in Innervating Locket combined with Garen, which they buffed in the final patch of set 10 to scale with his maximum HP. So if you're looking for that dream of having a unit with a ton of maximum HP that is able to beat everybody, Innervating Locket is the enabler for this particular line. Light Shield Crest in the Sentinels, that's been the same for every single set. We have the Mana Zane into either Jhin or Ezreal that can be quite good. It's also pretty good on Annie, which I'll probably have to add here. So Mana Zane is just generally good on a couple of different units. We also have Seeker's Arm Guard into Katarina that's quite good. I've actually seen in the stats that Seeker's Arm Guard into Annie also looks surprisingly good. We also have Sniper's Focus into Katarina, which is interesting because this basically turns her into a corner carry. We have Silvermere Dawn into Urgot. So I have not seen this yet. I'm curious to know if Silvermere Dawn on Urgot will actually stun in a cone, because he auto attacks in a cone, or if it will only stun his primary target and it's just mainly valuable because of the CC immunity as well as the increase in AD. So if you see this, report back to me, let me know. And then we have Suspicious Trenchcoat on Vi, which is kind of like Violet from set 13. So if you're able to get that build with Trenchcoat, Edge of Night, and Sterix onto this Vi, it's very powerful. Otherwise, I would not look to itemize this unit most of the time. And then finally here, I just want to mention that Zanya's Paradox is very broken in this particular set. There's a lot of AP carries that you could play it on. I would say Twisted Fate is the best one, but you can also play it onto Kayle as well as Jax. all of these are really powerful options. When it comes to emblems, 8-bit emblem into Riven Reroll can be quite good because you could play 6 8-bit and put the 8-bit emblem onto Viego. You also have Emo emblem into Ahri Reroll, which enables you to play a variation where you play 6 Emo and then put that emblem onto either Karthus or Sona, which is quite good. And then KDA is just good because KDA is good. It kind of is what it is. The last thing I want to mention here is that country, even though it's not S tier, the country emblem is one of the enablers for being able to play country reroll in the first place. This is a composition that got gutted a couple of times throughout the course of set 10, and we don't have its most broken augment anymore, which is 3's a crowd. So this is one of the few enablers for country reroll. When it comes to resources, we're mainly just looking for a lot of gold and heart steel in order to play into these fast 9 Jazz based boards. They are still broken. It's just very difficult to play into them. So this would be a really good way for you to learn TFT, is just force these compositions. Just force the max cap 80 flex boards. It will teach you a lot about the fundamentals about the game. And what do you have to lose? It's a revival set, you know? So something worth considering here, because you can stay safe and play a lot of these super fan compositions. But if you play into 80 flex, you'll see the bright side of being able to play flexibly. It's actually quite a bit of fun. And finally here, when it comes to augments, we have scoped weapons into Yasuo is quite good. We have hologram, cloning facility, trickster's glass. All of these are solid options. With Lulu, we just want to clone her, which we'll talk about when we get to that composition. Gargantuan resolve into Olaf Reroll, which is otherwise quite unplayable. And then also Yone Reroll is quite good. That's Jazz baby. We've seen that into Jazz Reroll plenty of times in the original set 10. Shimmer Scale Essence, Gambler's Blade is quite good into a number of different carries that you can see here. And then finally, I want to mention Worth the Wait here. So with Worth the Wait and Caretakers and Worth the Wait 2, you're able to get either one of two options. You can either get your 3-star, a little bit earlier, get your 4-star a little bit earlier, or it opens the door for you to not even use your headliner on the unit that you get. And you can actually choose, well, maybe not in the Caretaker's ally case, but with Worth the Wait, you can actually choose to get another headliner, which is pretty valuable. So even though you would end up with your 3-star and your 4-star a little bit later, you do get the option of maybe having a 4-cost headliner while playing normally what would be a reroll composition. So that's another thing to be open-minded to, which is very powerful about these particular augments. And the last thing to mention here is Exposed Weakness. This is a duo damage type comp where you have AD and AP. So having an augment that's able to sunder and shred is quite powerful. All right, let's get started with the most difficult composition for set 10, and that is AD Flex. What makes this so difficult is that there are 3 main different strategies that you can use to get to these final boards. And then number 2, there's a lot of different unit packages that you can look to play around, which adds a lot of complexity compared to most meta boards where you kind of know where you're going most of the time, the entire game. The first strategy that you can use to get to an AD Flex board is Heartsteel Lose Streaking from early game. So if you get something like Heartsteel Cassante, Heartsteel Aphelios, or if you just have Heartsteel early in stage 2, and then you can look to raise the stakes, cash out, roll down in stage 4, use the additional resources you got from Heartsteel to hopefully snowball into level 9, and then eventually look to play around an Ezreal capped board or a Caitlyn capped board, then that is a really strong option. Now, because you're going to be rolling down on level 8, then you're going to want to have some ideas for how to play around 4-cost. This is a standard 4-cost based board that you could look to play around. In fact, this used to be the most popular Heartsteel based variation that we saw, where you would play exactly these 8 units here. Unless you were able to find Lucian, then you would play Lucian over the Bard. And this would eventually go to this level 9 board, and you would actually be able to win games on exactly this board. Eventually, you're now going to want to transition this into the 5-cost base board. Now, that's the lose streak approach with Heartsteel early. The second approach is that you can play from a tempo opener, where you have something like the Superfan opener with Corki and Kai'Sa, or you have the Superfan Jinx opener. If you just have a really good AD based opener that you can win streak with for most of stage 2 and stage 3, you can eventually transition into Heartsteel in stage 4, lose streak most of your stage 4 while accumulating resources, go level 9 in stage 5 with a pretty sizable Heartsteel cash out because Heartsteel scales with stage round, and then eventually you're going to be able to play into either this Caitlyn based board or this Ezreal based board. So that's from the win streak position. The final strategy that you have available for you is if you have a Prismatic Econ augment. This is definitely the easiest by far. It's also the weakest because you're investing an entire augment into being able to play the composition, but it does make it a lot easier. And if you were to pair that Prismatic Econ augment with the Heartsteel Lose Streaking, then that could be really valuable as well and just multiply upon itself. The last thing I want to mention here is that any of these augments that give you a lot of HP can be really valuable with those Heartsteel cash outs, especially if it's able to enable you to get one additional cash out that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. The when it comes to the packages here, we talked about this level 8 board that you can consider. There's also looking to play around Senna with Qiyana. This is a very common package in the late game paired with Lucian. We also have the ability to play Kayn on our board, so you can replace Yone here, or if you're able to get Heartsteel Ezreal, you can also consider playing Kayn with 5 Heartsteel. When it comes to the max cap, you can actually replace this Aphelios with Kayn, because they did buff Kayn in patch 14.5, which is the final patch of set 10, and they made him a lot stronger than he was throughout the duration of most of set 10. You probably don't remember Kayn being that broken, but they made some massive buffs to him, so he's pretty good now. If you're able to get Kayn 2 on your final board, it's definitely going to be better than Aphelios, I think, most of the time. So that's another option that's worth keeping in mind. But yeah, this is a comp that you will get a lot better at if you just play it a lot. So just don't feel bad about if you mess it up a ton when you're first playing it, because that's completely normal. Thank goodness we do not have to use our brains anymore. Next up, we have vertical KDA. Click the KDA units, click Superfans, you win the game on the spot. It is what it is. Even in the original Remix Rumble last patch 14.5, this comp was pretty broken. So I'm pretty sure even if only challenger players were playing the game right now, you would still find that this composition was very meta. So this is not a comp that's just a result of people being bad. It is very good. When it comes to itemization here, it's pretty straightforward. On Akali, Hand of Justice is her Superfan item. On Ahri, it's Rabadon's. On Akali, you're looking to pair that Hand of Justice with more Hand of Justices. You can also go Bloodthirster, you can go IE, you can go Deathblade, you can go Guardbreaker, you can go Giant Slayer. There's a lot of really good options on Akali. It doesn't really matter what items you throw onto her. And then with Ahri, the items do matter. You're going to want to always have blue buff, and then you can pair that blue buff with a Nashor's, you can pair it with Gunblade, and then of course with Superfan, you only get to pair it with one or the other because you're forced to use Rabadon's, which is completely fine. One thing I want to mention with augments here is remember your roots and little buddies. Both of these are completely broken. If you look at little buddies here, we have 4 little buddies for our 2 main carries, which is pretty good. And then remember your roots is really good with any composition that's a vertical because all of your KDA units will benefit from that effect that Remember Your Roots gives. And then if you are able to get a KDA emblem, you could play Alawi on your board, just generically a good unit. You can play around Sona on your board. And then lastly here, you can play around Qiyana. It just enables you to get an additional 5 cost on the board, which is kind of nice. All right, the next comp is Ahri Reroll. This is currently the strongest reroll composition in set 10. Back in the original set 10, this comp was always A tier, so I do tend to think that it's a little bit overinflated right now just because of how easy it is to play. So you're playing around that Superfan package. It doesn't even really matter what version of Ahri you get because either way you can play a strong board. I think Emo Ahri is a little bit better. It enables you to play a higher max cap here with Sona in the late game, and I also just generally think it's pretty good in the early game. Spellweaver Ahri is completely fine though, and is actually the more common version I think most people are playing right now. So you can play around this board if you have Spellweaver Ahri. Again, both are completely fine, so you should really just pick up whichever one you find first. And if you have good items for Ahri, you can look to play towards it. There are so many good artifacts on Ahri here. So they're all itemized the exact same. You have Jeweled Gauntlet as the Superfan item. You pair that with a blue buff, and then you play any one of these artifacts. So you can play Mana Zane, you can play Lichbane, you can play Wit's End, you can play Luden's, you can play Zanya's, you can play Seeker's Arm Guard. And I think the reason why so many artifacts are good on Ahri is because most of the time you're taking artifact augments in early game, or you're getting it from an encounter, which means that it was more likely that you were able to have a 3-item Ahri super early on in the game. And that means you had really high tempo, which means you're able to cap out higher. And that snowball effect just leads to higher overall average placements. So I think being able to get an artifact on Ahri is pretty solid. When it comes to Radiant items, Radiant blue buff is the best one. 1 buff, 2 buff is a really good augment for this comp because it enables you to itemize Ahri really easily. Worth the wait, obviously going to be quite good because you can play towards that 4-star Ahri, and you can even see the 4-star scaling in the tooltip on tftflow.com. It's actually one of the things I think that TFT Flow does that's pretty cool. You know, no self-glaze or anything. And then the last thing I want to mention here is the couple of different variations that you can play. So you can play around this Poppy variation. This one's on the less frequent side of things, but you can also look to play around Emo Emblem into 6 Emo, and this is pretty solid. So you could play Emo Karthus in this case, or you can look to play around Emo Sona. Both of these are pretty good. I think Sona is better, but obviously it's easier to hit Karthus 2 than it is to hit Sona, so just be mindful of that. But I do think that Emo Emblem is actually a little bit underrated right now. I think people are not playing it correctly, and I do think that Poppy is a very strong unit. This was a very underrated unit for a lot of set 10 by most players. Obviously high level players knew how good she was, but yeah, this Emo Emblem I think is actually pretty solid into Ahri Reroll. All right, next up we have one of the most iconic compositions for set 10, and that is Disco Dazzler. In my opinion, has the best music for the entire set, is this particular comp. Pretty straightforward. You should usually look to play this if you have the Disco Dazzler opener with some AP items. That's pretty good. And you should definitely consider playing towards this if you have Zhonya's Paradox on Twisted Fate. Completely broken item on him. And then also Unending Despair, which is a new artifact for set 10 at least. On Blitzcrank is pretty solid as well. But Zhonya's Paradox on Twisted Fate is completely broken. Wand Overflow is also very good in this composition. You can use infinite rods. Twisted Fate can use 3 of them. Blitzcrank can use them. Ziggs can use them. So Wand Overflow quite good for this composition. And then also Little Buddies, I remember being a completely broken augment for this comp. Now, before you're able to get these 5 costs like Alawi and Ziggs here, you can look to play around these no legendary boards. So Zac would be an example here. You can also look to play around 4 Dazzler if you have Dazzler or Twisted Fate. The other option that I also saw played back in the original set 10 was playing around Thresh, which would pair with your Taric here, so you could just play Thresh instead of the Zac. And the absolute max cap here is you play as many 5 cost as possible, where you have Qiyana, you have Sona, you have Ziggs, you have Alawi, but you're not usually going to be able to get to this absolute max cap because it's too expensive. All right, next up we have Vertical Pentakill, or Akali Viego Karthus, as I used to say, which is definitely a mouthful. The big thing about this comp is it's a vertical composition. Usually that means it doesn't cap out that high, but it is pretty easy to play. It plays around the Superfan package. It's not as powerful as Vertical KDA, but it is pretty powerful. And when it comes to itemization here on the Karthus, if you get him as your Superfan, you're guaranteed the Adaptive Helm, and then you're going to pair that with a Guard Breaker, and then Rabadons or Shojin. Double mana is completely fine on the Karthus. When it comes to Viego, the only rule of thumb here is you need Edge of Night. Every single other item is optional, so his Superfan item is Titan's Resolve, and you could build Bloodthirster onto him, you could build IE onto him, you could build Hodge onto him, you could build Giant Slayer, Deathblade. All sorts of options are available here, but typical for Viego is an Omnivamp item plus Edge of Night, which means your Superfan item can just fill in the third item with the Titan's Resolve. And then for Akali, her Superfan item is Hand of Justice. You can build all sorts of items onto her as well. Very flexible. You can go Deathblade, Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker, Red Buff, and another Hodge, Bloodthirster, IE. All of these are viable options. So the big thing of note here is that the item flexibility in this comp is very high, which means that you shouldn't be holding on to your items to get quote-unquote best in slot on these different units here. You should just be slamming whatever works for you in the early and mid game for tempo. And then if you're able to get a Pentakill emblem, that allows you to go Edgelord on Viego, and then you can get Pentakill on Akali, which is very good. All right, next up we have Katarina Reroll. This is yet another Superfan reroll composition. The Superfan item on Katarina is Hand of Justice, and you can either pair that with Jeweled Gauntlet plus Guard Breaker or Double Hodge plus Jeweled Gauntlet. Both of those are pretty good builds. And then there are a couple of artifacts that are worth noting here. So Zhonya's was good in the original set 10. It's still good now. But now we also have Sniper's Focus, which is quite good, Seeker's Arm Guard, which is quite good, and then Luden's to a lesser extent. Another interesting thing here is Silvermere Dawn on Zed is actually quite solid as well. So you can be open-minded to that if you have multiple different artifacts. But if we go over to Snipers here, you can actually see that you can play her as a corner carry because her base range is 2, so it goes up to 4, and you can actually just play her in the corner like this, which is quite interesting. The other thing that's different about this particular revival is that you can actually go for Yone 3. So historically, you would not be able to go for Yone 3 in this composition, just because you didn't have the resources to do so, and because Yone was so contested. And because we actually have that increase in bag sizes from 18 to 30 for 3 costs, makes it a lot more likely that you'll actually be able to hit that Yone 3 if you choose to go for it. I still don't know if it's the correct decision to go for Yone 3 at this point in time, or if it's better to just push to level 8 and level 9 and try to find Z2 and Qiyana, because 6 Crowd Diver is a massive spike for this composition. But it is an option to go for Yone 3 now, so I did want to note that. All right, next up we have Kayle Reroll. So this is a composition most people are playing wrong from what I can see in the stats, because I think a lot of people are just playing Vertical Pentakill or just Vertical Edgelord, and you should be playing the Superfan package. Most people who have played the original set 10 know this, but if you look at the stats for Kayle Reroll, it looks bad, but that's just because a lot of people are not playing Superfan. Now with Superfan, you get Rageblade as your Superfan item, and then you want to pair that with a second Rageblade plus Gunblade. Shouldn't be that difficult to do since you already get one item for free. You can also go Archangel, but but Archangel is definitely worse than Rageblade for this. And then for your best in slot, you're looking for Zanya's, very broken on Kayle. Gambler's Blade also quite good. Wit's End, I'm pretty sure is not that good, but I thought like theoretically it should work, but it doesn't seem like it actually does, based on the stats at least. So I would hold this one with a grain of salt. We'll see as more people try it if it's actually good. And then with Unending Despair, the big thing I want to note about this is that if you're able to get Headliner Mordekaiser, he gains this permanent scaling AP effect. So I think that's actually pretty strong with Unending Despair. You should consider going for Headliner Mordekaiser instead of Headliner Kayle if you have specifically this build. And then lastly, if you have a Pentakill emblem, you can play for 7 Pentakill, which is definitely stronger than having 3 Edgelord on your board. All right, the next comp is Punk Reroll. Pretty straightforward. If you have a good opener for this composition, like a Jinx Headliner, and you have good items for it, you can consider playing for it. The main units that you're looking to add here are Guardians and then Vex in the backline. When it comes to artifacts, Gold Collector on Jinx is pretty good, Gambler's Blade is pretty good, and Sniper's Focus. Trickster's looks really good on Pantheon. I'm not entirely sure why that is. My only guess is that the Trickster clone benefits from the Punk rerolls that you do, but I don't know that for a fact, so you guys can report back to me if that's the case. And then the final artifact that's worth noting here is Trenchcoat on Vi, where you can build that typical Trenchcoat, Edge of Night, and Sterix, solo frontline your Vi. I'm assuming this is very similar to Violet from set 13, when we would itemize her like this as well. And then you have the Vi split up immediately and do a ton of damage throughout the course of the fight. No Scout Pivot is pretty good into this line. And then I think Category 5 is decent into it, just because Jinx is one of the few Runon's Hurricane carries in the game right now. Yes, an oldie but a goodie. I have a very good connection with this particular composition. I played a lot of it, I made a guide for it, so I remember this comp quite well. You play this standard level 7 board, lots of traits, 7 traits active. If you have That's Jazz Baby, you start scaling a bunch of stats on your Jazz units. This is best in slot on Misfortune. If you are able to get a Bard Headliner, which you're going to want very early game if you're going to commit to that Bard Headliner, then you're going to go for double mana item on the Bard. So you're going to go Adaptive Helm, which is his super fan item, and then Shojin, or Adaptive Helm plus blue buff. You could even go triple mana item, but by the time you get to the end of the game, you're ideally just going to have adaptive plus double AP, so that that very first cast that he shoots out is as powerful as possible. Because the way his Headliner effect works is that every single time that he cast 8 times, he cast an additional Doot on his very first time that he does his ability. You can read all of this if you want to, but really all that matters, all you need to understand is that he's stacking the very first cast that he fires off every single fight, and so that by the time you get to stage 5, you really do ideally want to have double AP on this guy, as much AP as possible, so that that cast that he does is as powerful as possible at the start of each fight. And then for your max cap here, pretty straightforward, you're just looking to add Lucian plus Ziggs. If you're able to get to this final board, you're doing just fine. All right, let's just get the 2 comps I'm most connected to out of the way back to back. This is the second one, Ahri Sentinels. I one-tricked this to Masters back in the original set 10. It's one of the most popular videos on this YouTube channel. Would not be surprised if a high percentage of you came originally from that video. So it's kind of funny to come full circle like this. Because I one-tricked it, I know a lot about the composition and some basic ideas that you should follow when playing it. So first of all, you do definitely want to hold on to your Sentinels in the early game, because you never know which ones you're going to end up missing later on. That's just generally true of any vertical. The other thing is that Kai'Sa is one of the best item holders for this composition, so you actually often end up in a spot where you play towards an AD item holder rather than an AP item holder for your Ahri items, just because Kai'Sa is so good with that blue buff, and you can still put a Nashor's on her and it's just fine. The last thing I did want to mention here is that this comp is a lot weaker than it was back when I originally one-tricked it, which means that the only reason it's doing so well in the stats as of right now is because it's such an easy comp to play. It's really hard to mess this up. But by the time we got to the end of set 10, the main condition under which you would actually play this line wasn't like this. You would usually only play it if you were able to get a Sentinel dummy and were able to play 8 Sentinel with the dummy in the front line like this, and then you would consider playing it. So really, you would only play it if you were able to get something like Wandering Trainer with that Sentinel dummy, then you would consider playing towards this line. But normally it was actually not that played towards the end of the set. So I do want to mention that as the revival set gets more optimized, I would not consider this comp to be on the stronger side of things unless you either get that Wandering Trainer or if you get Light Shield Crest, which is also completely broken in any Sentinel based line. All right, next up we have Riven Reroll. So with Riven Reroll, this was one of the most popular comps back in the original set 10, and it's not performing that well right now if you look at the stats, but I do tend to think this is one of those comps that people just tend to play from bad spots or don't play it correctly, so that might be skewing the stats downward. So a couple of things of note here. First of all, Riven always wants QSS, doesn't really matter what the build is, always build QSS on Riven. The other thing here is that I think the original best in slot was Bloodthirster Giant Slayer QSS. I now think that BT Titans QSS is slightly better, but this build is still very good. Also, Mittens did not exist in the original set 10. It's her best in slot artifact, so keep that in mind. Death's Defiance is also pretty good on her, as well as Spectral Cutlass. And then when it comes to Radiant items, I'm not entirely sure what her best one is, so for now, I've just done Bloodthirster, because I'm pretty sure that Radiant Refractor should be good in this comp, but I think we need to wait for more stats to know exactly what the best particular Radiant item is on her. If you're able to get that 8-bit emblem, you can throw that onto Viego, and this is the absolute max cap where you have 6 8-bits and the Jazz setup. This particular board, you're probably going to go first pretty much every single time. And then there's also this variation here where you look to play Kayn on your board just because Kayn is so strong after some of the buffs that they made to him in the final patch of set 10. One other thing to note here before we move forward is that Yone is an option here where you can actually 3-star Yone, which was not an option before usually when you played this comp. And typically if you were able to 3-star both Yone and Riven, you were guaranteed first. So I am curious to know whether that's correct or not. I would imagine it is correct to try to go for a Yone 3 as well, and maybe even Mordekaiser 3. So just be open-minded to that now that we have those bigger bag sizes, as that might actually be the best way to cap out the board rather than pushing levels. All right, next up we have some of our conditional lines, starting off with Yasuo Reroll. This one I'm kind of excited about because I think I'm one of the first people to discover that ranged Yasuo is pretty good. So you play him kind of like Nocturne / Shaco, where if he has 3 range, you're going to put him in this slot right here, or you can put him right here if you're trying to protect him from KDA Akali. And you're just looking to go for that rapid fire cannon, fishbone, sniper's focus, all really solid options for giving him that additional range as well as scoped weapons. If you are able to get him for range, you can put him in the corner. Again, just be careful of KDA Akali there in those type of spots. In that type of condition, you might actually want the Hand of Justice with IE, but generally speaking, when we were playing Nocturne, Giant Slayer was a lot better, so you probably just want to keep him safe and just build full damage onto him. There are other artifacts that are pretty good on Yasuo as well, though, so you can build Spectral Cutlass onto him, pretty good. Prowler's Claw is pretty good. Mittens is solid, but not as good as those 2 other artifacts, but the range artifacts are definitely on the more exciting side. There are some augments here as well that are worth considering, so worth the wait into this comp, obviously pretty good. Blinked Out, generally good into the different true damage compositions. And then Not Today, very good because there are infinite units that you can use with Edge of Night. Yasuo can use it, Akali can use it, Kiana can use it, Viego can use it, so you're not going to run short of units that can actually use that item in particular, so you can easily get a secondary carry online using that Edge of Night. All right, next up we have Executioner Reroll. So this is a composition that I think is pretty solid if you're able to get an artifact for Amumu, Samira, or Vex. They all have one artifact that's like very powerful, and then some other artifacts that I'm sure you could use that are fine. But for Vex, that is Horizon Focus because her ability stuns in a 1 hex radius. So she does a lot of stunning, which Horizon Focus procs and deals damage based off of, which is pretty good, very synergistic. With Amumu, that would be Innervating Locket. You're solo frontlining him in this particular composition. So just making him as tanky as possible is very valuable. And then Gold Collector on Samira, which scales with crit, is very powerful as well. So generally speaking, I gate this behind the condition of trying to get one of those artifacts. Or if you have a pretty solid reroll augment like Heroic Grab Bag, for example, you can consider playing into this. Or if you have a lot of items, you can consider playing into this, because the big thing about this particular composition is you really need to have 3-item Amumu, 3-item Vex, and 3-item Samira. And then it doesn't even hurt to be able to get 3 items onto your Karthus or Akali here, because you have 6 Executioner for them, might as well, but it's hard to get that many different items. So again, I tend to think this is a little bit better when you play it from an artifact spot, such as one of those 3 different artifacts that are listed here. I also think it's very good if you're able to play this from Exposed Weakness, because this is a mixed damage composition. You'll see that we have Vex as AP, we have Samira as AD. So in those types of compositions, being able to get something like Obsidian Cleaver, or in this case, this augment that provides us our Shred and Sunder so that we can focus on pure damage is very helpful. All right, next up we have Country Reroll. So this is an incredibly expensive composition, needs a lot of different items here, and the best augment that existed for it in set 10, Three's a Crowd, does not exist in set 14, which means we cannot play it in the revival set. So that kind of hurts this comp a lot, and it's really quite conditional now. I would say the main two conditions under which I would consider playing this is one, having an artifact for Urgot in particular, because if all you have is an artifact for Samira, Amumu, or Vex, then you could just play Executioners instead, which might just be better. So if you have specifically an artifact for Urgot, that's definitely worth mentioning. So you have Silvermere Dawn, you have Mittens, as well as the Trenchcoat build. And then the other condition under which I would play this is if you have a country emblem, you can play towards 7 country. They actually did buff 7 country towards the end of this set, but usually I would not be angling towards this line most of the time, just because of how expensive it is and how many different items that it requires, and the fact that its win rate is so low. So when you combine all of those things together, you really do need to have specific conditions before you consider playing into this line. One of the last things that Riot did for set 10 is they buffed Garen's mana from 90 down to 80, which means that he casts more often, which means he gains more max HP, which means it's theoretically possible to build an immortal Garen. And now that we have the new artifacts, specifically Innervating Locket, we now are in a spot where it is actually possible to build a Garen that's immortal, but I would not play this without Innervating Locket. I think this is locked behind an Innervating Locket, and then you're trying to get as many conditions for making the Garen as powerful as possible. You're trying to make him immortal. You want to go for artifacts that are going to make him stronger, so that's Anima Visage and Talisman of Ascension. You are looking for Radiant items, where you can go for a Radiant Archangel, Radiant Dragon's Will, Radiant Warmogs. I tend to think the tank items are a little bit better than the Radiant Archangel here in this case, if you have an option. And then Light Shield Crest is also really powerful. You're not going to put that onto the Garen. You're going to put that onto the Blitzcrank instead. And then you want to build a Gunblade backline to heal up the Garen until he's able to reach the critical mass of becoming immortal. Generally speaking, I don't think you're going to see this too often, but when you do see it, it's going to be very cool. All right, next up, we're going to rapid fire through a couple of different compositions that are on the fringe side, starting off with Jax Reroll. So with Jax, we're mainly looking for having Zanyas early on a Jax headliner. If you have those conditions, then you can consider playing for this. You're going to reroll for Jax 3 and Lux 3, EDM selector on Jax, unless their front line is extremely beefy, then you can do it on Lux instead. You're going to build full AP onto the Lux because she's guaranteed some number of casts from EDM. The other condition under which you could play this is if you have it into or submit to the pit. That's also pretty solid as well. Then we have Yone Reroll. So with Yone Reroll, we're mainly looking to play this from Gargantuan Resolve, or if you have one of the artifacts for Yone, that can be pretty solid as well. And you're mainly looking to play towards the Crowd Diver board. If you have Edgelord Yone, it's not the end of the world, but it definitely caps higher if you're able to get to the 6 Crowd Diver. Next up, we have Lulu Reroll. So with Lulu, we are looking for cloning the Lulu as many times as possible. You can do that with Trickster's Glass. You can do that with Cloning Facility. You can do that with Hologram. All of these are pretty solid options. And then you're looking for Hyperpop Lulu. And the idea is you're going to group up all of your Lulus, and they're going to feed mana to each other and perma increase their own attack speed. You're going to build as much mana as possible on your primary Lulu, which is your headliner. And hopefully with enough Lulus, you're going to be able to infinitely cast, infinitely CC the enemy's board, and just pop off, basically. It's pretty fun, but obviously pretty situational as well. And the last one here is Olaf Reroll. There are 2 main conditions under which you should play this, which are Gargantuan Resolve and Too Big to Fail. You'll note that when you look at Olaf builds, they are all Titans Resolve and Sterix Gauge. There is no Bloodthirster to be found anywhere here. That's because Olaf already has healing built into his kit, which scales with AP, which you get from Titans Resolve. So you do not need Bloodthirster on him at all. And generally speaking, I do not recommend building it. You are going to duo carry Kayle in the backline most of the time. And again, only play this if you're able to get Gargantuan Resolve or Too Big to Fail, or maybe if you're able to get Mittens with a really good opener. That's another consideration here. But most of the time, you're really only looking to play this from very circumstantial spots. All right, that's it for the Set 10 patch guide. Hopefully it was helpful for all of you. Again, remember that you're just going to be bullying noobs, and that's okay. It's a lot of fun to do that. Brings me back to the good old days of the Xbox 360, where I felt like I was one of the best people ever, even though I was just a big fish in a small pond. That was one thing that sucked about the rise of competitive games, is that you realize very quickly how good some people can really be. So sometimes it's fun to just stomp a bunch of noobs. And if that's what you want to do, then following these types of patch guides for Set 10 absolutely will give you that feeling. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy it. I'll see you next time.